This is Brett Weinstein.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Bruce Party.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is Dr. Pierre Corey.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
This is Vance Crowe, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Monday. Okay, the Cornerstone Forum, that was quick, is in the rearview mirror, okay? If you do want to catch it, you can start catching the Cornerstone Forum today on Substack. So become a paid member. You can catch up on all the conversations we had this past weekend. I hope you do. I want to give a shout out to Silver Gold Bull Valley Credit Union for helping put on the show. And without these two companies, it would not be possible to put on the show, specifically in Calgary. They have been extremely good to me. So a shout out to them. A shout out to all the volunteers, my wife and Toby and Shannon and just like all the people who help put on such a great show. To all the speakers who came in, my hat's off to you. To Twos for emceeing, and for all of you who made it out. Okay, I just want to say thank you again from bottom of my heart. It's super cool to have people come be a part of an idea, kind of drew it out on a piece of paper. I continue to do that, I go, what do I want to see this year? And then, write it out. And then you debate it with like way too many people. And then you come back to your piece of paper and you rewrite and, and then it finally comes out. So thank you to everyone who, traveled far and wide to come to it. Shout out to all of you. Now it's Monday, Silver Gold Bull, precious metals, whether it's buying, selling, storing, anything to do with precious metals, silvergoldbull.ca. If you have questions, text or email Grahame for details with any questions you have around investing in precious metals or for future silver dues exclusively for S&P listeners. And you can find them at silvergoldbull.ca or .com, or you can go down in the show notes, folks, and just text Grahame and get, hear the answers right from a guy. You can talk to him on the phone. Bow Valley Credit Union, they're all about lending, deposits, real financial advice. You can open accounts, talk through lending options, and get help with banking all in a space designed for conversations, not transactions. If you want smarter banking with gold, silver, Bitcoin, sound money, and personal freedom, think BVCU. For all your banking needs, head to bowvalleycu.com. Profit River, when it comes to firearms here in Canada, well, they're the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories, serving all of you wonderful people here in the big old country of Canada. Just go to profitriver.com and you can get squared away there. When it comes to deck season, yes, the sun is shining, and I know it's right around the corner, okay? When it comes to wood, look no further here in Lloydminster. Windsor Plywood, Carly Kloss and his team over there, whether we're talking mantles, decks, windows, doors, sheds, podcast studio tables, podcast studios, quality wood, character wood, Windsor Plywood. That's Carly Kloss and his team over there. And I just want to thank everybody again for coming out. Substack. You want to catch what we did this past weekend? Head over to Substack, become a paid member. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, Substack, subscribe, leave a review. You're enjoying the show? Share with a friend. All right, let's get on to that tale of the tape. Today's guest is an author and policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C. I'm talking about Emma Waters. So buckle up. Here we go. Well, welcome to the Shaun Newman Podcast. Today I'm joined by Emma Waters. Ma'am, thanks for hopping on.
Of course. Thanks for having me today.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to assume 90-some%, if not higher, my audience has no idea who Emma is. So how about we just start there? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a senior policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. I cover federal policy and state policy dealing with, really anywhere you see technology intersect with the human person. So that means IVF, surrogacy, biotechnology, family policy, and the list goes on and on. So all of the least controversial topics you can imagine. So my day job is a very nerdy exploration of all of those issues on the policy application side. However, I am also married. I have two beautiful girls. We're expecting our third girl later this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. My husband and I are both Gen Z, so we're a little bit of an outlier for our generation, that we've gotten married young, that we're having kids. And I found that when I was frequently speaking at events, I would have about half of my questions on the policy areas I work on. And then about half the questions from women and increasingly men would just be, okay, set all of that aside. How do you actually do this marriage and family thing? And so Lead Like Jael and a lot of the projects I've been working on recently with the book and other related things have really been focused on this very practical question of, we can talk all day about declining birth rates, but if men and women are just struggling to date each other to begin with, then we have a much larger problem. So a lot of my work is policy, but then a growing portion of it is focused on my book topic of just like very practical questions around what it means to be a woman, to get married, to have kids, things in that space.
So you go around giving talks, and then the majority or half the questions, I should say, is like, how do you do that? Isn't that, I don't know, married, 3 kids, happily married. And I go, what a strange question. Like, what a strange world to live in where it's like, how do you do that? I assume you were kind of taken back when the first time that was asked, but maybe walk me through this.
Yeah, I would be more taken aback, except for the fact that many of our friends are dealing with these exact same questions. So the way that it's broken down, millennials are on track, and that's like, I don't know, folks born in like the 80s and 90s, basically. Millennials are on track for about 1/4 of them to never have kids or get married. Gen Z, my generation, which is 1997 to about 2012, if trends don't change, is projected that 1/3 of them will never have kids. That is massively high compared to previous generations. So it seems crazy, especially if you got married and are from an older generation. But for my generation, it is less and less likely that you actually find someone and get married within your 20s or even early 30s. Exceptions for religious communities, certainly, where that's a lot of those trends are in place. But all that to say, it wasn't as surprising to me because that is frankly just the conversations I'm hearing day in and day out just from my friends who are wrestling with these questions.
Would you notice like I come from small town Alberta, Saskatchewan, right? And so like the closer you get to the city, I can see this. Like in Canada, I was looking it up because I saw your, for the audience, you're in the United States. And so I think, forgive me, you'll know the stat. What is the birth rate now for the States? 1.6?
1.6.
1.6. In Canada, it's closer to 1.25.
That's
right?
insane.
That's insane. But it's funny, in my world, I don't see it because I don't know, I assume I'm removed from the city, right? Like out on the farm or closer you get to everybody gets married for the most part, has kids for the most part, and doesn't just have one. Most of them have multiples. Like I'm not sitting here saying they all have 6 anymore because that used to be the way when I was growing up. Everybody you ran into seemed to have large families. That is definitely unusual these days. But where you're sitting, like, do you notice a difference? The city life to maybe closer to a rural, and is there a difference there?
Okay, so this is actually a really interesting question because generally speaking, there will be a distinction here. Practically speaking, if you're living in a city, finding housing, if you live in a city, buying a house anytime soon is probably completely off the market. So you're probably renting long term. Even if you're renting long term, it's really hard to find housing that has multiple bedrooms. And so when we lived in Washington, D.C., we had 2 bedrooms and that worked for a time. But now we're closer to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so even closer to you guys in Canada, and have 3 bedrooms, but we'll still need more bedrooms as we start having more kids. And the longer you're in a city, the harder it is to actually find space to put those children. So there's a massive affordability question. There's also just questions of those who are drawn to living in a city are oftentimes more career-minded. More career-minded people may not prioritize children. And so then you typically have this idea that if you live in more rural areas where housing is more affordable, where there's more space, it's easier to grow your family. If you live in a more rural area, you oftentimes have a higher chance of living close to family or close communities that can also help support you. So you don't feel like you're as much on your own there. But what's so interesting is that a couple of weeks ago, there was a story in the New York Times talking about declining birth rates. And they made the argument that the reason we're seeing such a sharp decline in birth rates, at least in the United States, is because women who were 20 to 24 years old without a bachelor's degree, so oftentimes women who were in a lower socioeconomic situation, who oftentimes tend to live in more rural areas, are way less likely than ever to have children. So 50% of the drop that we're seeing in our birth rate in the US is because that demographic of 20 to 24-year-old women without a bachelor's degree aren't having children like they used to. And I think that's where you're actually seeing it cut against the typical rural urban divide that we had for a long time. And now there's just a complete rethinking of children. Some of those women cited things like personal independence, some of them cited career, but by and large, the article was young women saying, I really want to have kids. Some of them said, in fact, I want to be a stay-at-home mom and raise my kids, but financially speaking, I don't see how this is going to be possible. And that wasn't because they were living in the middle of the city. It was just the demands of working a 40-hour-a-week wage earner hourly job that made having kids seem almost impossible on that kind of income.
And that's sad.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, maybe I don't speak. I certainly don't speak for every parent, but you start having kids and you just broke. I mean, that's how it starts. I don't think anybody starts rich with kids, do they? I don't know. Maybe you could tell me different. Like, do you, like, you look at it and you go, oh, this is going to be tough. But if you knew how tough it was actually going to be, you probably wouldn't do it. On the flip side, if you knew how much meaning it gave to life, you probably would do it. So it's like, I don't know. Like, I sit there and I go, like, the affordability. Well, you know, my wife and I will talk about when we first started having kids and how broke we were. And that was now going on 10 years ago. And now I'm not sitting here saying it ain't getting worse. It's getting worse. But, like, you can't let what the world's doing impact something so important. I mean, I don't know. Like, that seems like an even stranger crisis where the right people aren't talking to those people. I assume that's why you're writing your book.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And I do think that you're right. Certainly, times are harder, things are different. And yet, at the same time, I think there's a very fair question of what are these sort of standards of living and expectations that people are bringing to the table. Because I don't know many people who aren't in some capacity very broke when they start having kids, especially if you're having kids in your 20s. If you wait till your 30s, you're well established in your career, you might have a really good savings account. But for a lot of people who are prioritizing children young, it's very much a scrappy endeavor where it's you, your spouse, the house you can afford, the kids you have, and you just kind of figure it out. And I have a lot of friends who have done that and are continuing to do that. And it's not to be trite, because in no way should you make light of the financial difficulties. However, there's also this very real sense that I think when people are faithful in putting first things first, that in prioritizing marriage and having children, that there are so many different sources of support that are available to you, whether that's through government support, whether that's church-based support or community-based support, whatever that situation is. I have seen the Lord be so faithful in the lives of people who were willing to trust him with the children that they were having and able to make ends meet, even if it seemed insane, even if it seemed month to month they would never make it. The Lord is just so faithful in that moment. And this is even something that demographer Brad Wilcox has found in his research. He has something called the success sequence. And this has actually been introduced as legislation to be taught in schools. It's something that's talked about widely in the family policy space. But what he found is that if you have an individual who graduates high school, so just high school, gets a job, gets married, and then has kids in that order, it doesn't matter what their starting point is, what their family background is, what their racial socioeconomic makeup is, they have a 93% chance of never being in poverty. Graduate high school, get a job, get married, have kids, and do it in that order. 93% chance you will not be in poverty. And that is regardless of your background. So there's also this sense of, if you are prioritizing sort of the first things first and being responsible in the decisions you're making, you're also setting yourself up for a lifetime of success in a way that's actually, in many cases, very much within your power and agency. Now, that doesn't mean people who have done it in a different order and have one, not the other, that doesn't mean they're going to be doomed to poverty and that there's nothing you can do. It's just that even that basic 4-step formula sets you up for massive success. imagine how much you can then tinker and adjust and make up for the other pieces as you go. So it's very encouraging. Not that you're not going to be stressed about finances or have to be very frugal for a season of your life or maybe your whole life. My parents, my dad worked a good job, but it wasn't a very high paying job when I was growing up. My mom was a stay at home mom. She homeschooled all of us kids. They had to be exceptionally frugal because there just wasn't a lot of money, period. Even living in a very rural area, it was very tight making ends meet. And yet they did it, and they did it well. We weren't just walking around thinking about how poor we were and sad all of the time. And so there's certainly, I think, really good models for how to do it. It just requires a lot of creativity and work and a real investment in making it work.
Well, unless you come from like a crazy amount of money, Emma, like you can stress about having $5 in the bank account or $500 or 5,000. People deal with that. Like there's just stress in trying to navigate expenses and a house and all the things that come with it because it's all new to you. And I mean, I just go back to when we were just talking about it. When we first bought our house, and you had a mortgage to pay, and then you realized all the costs that came with even just getting the house, and you're like, oh my God. And then you get in the house and you got no furniture, and you're like, oh, well, I guess we're sleeping on the floor for the first little bit until the next paycheck. Like this, how many people have that story? A ton. And I'm not sitting here saying that you can't have $1 million in the bank and do it another way. I'm just, the stress of money is always there. Always. Yeah. So to me, like, that's another thing that a younger generation, it kind of gets lost on. Now, I'm once again not making light of the fact how expensive things have got. Full stop. It's gotten to insane levels. And I speak from a Canadian standpoint. You're speaking from a U.S. standpoint. We can all see it. It's like, well, if the order is those four things and it's got a 93% success rate, I mean, you can do it different ways, but that's a pretty good success rate.
Yeah.
The problem with that order now is like jobs, like a good paying job that actually keeps up with the rate of inflation is almost impossible. The cost, I don't know about where you're sitting, but the cost of housing here is insane. I was just reading a report this morning on farmland. I think it just said, it's funny, I got it sitting right here, folks. And I want to say it went up by 12.2% in Manitoba, 11.4% in Alberta, 9.4% in Saskatchewan. And you start doing your thought process on that. You're like, that's not the 2% they keep telling us, right? Oh yeah, it's inflation only went up 2%. Sorry, to me, like, I'm kind of like, you have to just steer into it. And the other hand, I'm kind of like sympathetic to the next generation because of how bad it is getting.
Yeah, we call it a whole government approach, which is to say that this needs to be an all hands on deck approach to addressing the declining birth rates in the United States. And it certainly isn't just a government solution. It's a cultural, religious, social solution, but it needs to be all parties invested in the question of how do we make it both aspirational and attainable to have children. We want people to desire having kids and getting married and viewing those as positive additions to our lives. Those are good and delightful gifts that we want to invest in and sacrifice for and be a part of. And we also want to make it attainable, where we're thinking about ways, both in the private sector, public sector, government, that we can remove as many barriers as possible for young people, for families having the children they desire.
Have you, so as a policy analyst, I assume you've taken a look at Hungary's approach where, like women who have children and multiple children, there's incentives for it. Is there any case to be made for that in North America?
It's a really interesting question. And a lot of people, myself included, have looked very closely at it. What we've seen in Hungary is that their investment in family formation, and I think it was as much as 5% of their total GDP was going toward this, has not necessarily resulted in more children being born. There was a slight boost and then it sort of leveled back out since then. But they have seen a significant increase in the number of people getting married. And they've seen a significant reduction, maybe even close to a 50% reduction in the number of abortions that are happening in Hungary. So if you think about Hungary's family policy as a marriage family formation incentive, they seem to have they seem to have had success and positive steps in the right direction there. Thus far, it has not translated in a larger number of children being born, and whether that's because people getting married just haven't started having kids yet, but they will have those kids, and so there's a time lapse there that will make up for it, or whether there's a different breakdown of the system. That's the ongoing question. Now, thinking of the American context, it's an interesting question. So I work for the Heritage Foundation, as I mentioned, and so we recently published a massive family policy paper that I and four others co-authored, and it was looking at a whole host of ways to support family formation. We had about 10 pages of like a 200-page report focused on financial incentives, and so that was everything from like an iNest account, which was investing in newlyweds, especially newlyweds who are having children early on. There was another option for an extended or a boosted child tax credit, if you will, increasing the amount that families are getting for the children that they're having, and a few different financial incentives like that, with the goal of basically just making it easier to provide more support to families who are having kids. But beyond that, a lot of the report really focused on all of these secondary factors related to it, because I think there is a recognition that mere cash transfers or a cash first approach to boosting the birth rate will probably fall flat and not actually have the results comparable to the amount of money you're investing, if that makes sense. It certainly needs, like, I'm certainly on board with financial support, but it needs to be way more than that when it comes to everything from improving our infertility care and men and women's health to taking seriously the damages done by pornography and social media and our digital devices that have really changed the way we look at the world, and everything to really asking the question of how do you help men and women get married in the first place. So one of my colleagues spent a lot of his section writing about how you help cohabiting couples transition into marriage, because oftentimes you will have these fairly unstable, depending on the situation, cohabiting relationships that tend to break up after about 2 to 5 years. And so how do you actually help those couples go from cohabitation to a stable marriage with the relationship tools and education they need? So there's a host of, I think, different approaches that taken together would go a long way in really encouraging people to get married, stay married, and have kids. So it'll take parts of what Hungary is doing, but it'll probably take a whole lot more to really get us across the line there.
If people want to attack abortion, though, a 50% reduction raises my, I go, what? 50% reduction? You know, you talk about like, well, we haven't really seen I go, people have been wondering that question, you know, on abortion for, I don't know how many years. It's been a lot. A 50% reduction, that's a positive. Like, that's a huge positive. But then you rattled off a whole bunch of things. And one of the other things I was curious wasn't in there. You had porn, apologies. I can't even say it. Infertility.
Infertility care. Yes.
Yeah. Don't know what's going on with my mouth there. Social media. I wonder, I don't know this on Hungary or the eastern side of Europe. But you know, here in the Western world, the LGBTQ list, when we're talking about having children, they voice their concern on that an awful lot to men, to women. How are they going to be impacted by this? And like, I don't know about the other side of the world, but I feel like that isn't in the conversation. They're talking about a man and a woman. Here we have this a very complex discussion that normally wouldn't be there, right? Like, normally you're not worried about, you know, I mean, like, I was just reading the other day about, like, you know, can a man have a baby, right? And I'm like, what are we talking about? We have lost our bloody minds. Even if science could pull it off, that is insane and we should not do it. Regardless, the porn, the infertility care that I cannot spit out of my mouth, social media, all add into this. This is a strange world that kids are entering into. I would argue there's nothing new under the sun, and I'd also argue that it's always been a strange world, but the destruction of the family unit is evident.
Yeah, 100%. It's really fascinating. If you look at the last 60 years, 60, 70 years or so, you see a really interesting progression. So 1950s through the early 60s, the United States had its highest average birth rate, where the birth rate, it was something like 3.5, 3.76 kids on average per woman, which means there were many women who were having far more kids than that. And that's well above the replacement rate of 2.1, which is where countries really want to be around. Then as the years went on, you have the birth control pill introduced in the 1960s. By 1972-73, the birth control pill had hit mass consumption with over 10 million users in the United States. In 1973, you also had Roe v. Wade decided, which erroneously said that there was a constitutional right to an abortion. And what's so interesting is if you look at birth rate charts, you see birth rates high, steady, and then they start declining near the very end of the 60s, beginning of the 1970s. And then 1972, the birth rate is still just over 2 kids on average. By 1973, you have 1.88 children on average, and the numbers just, or the rate just kept declining. And then you have this period of sort of the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, where the birth rate was actually like closer to 2 again. And actually in 2006, in the beginning of 2007, it hits that peak of 2.1. We're at replacement rate. And then what happens? The massive financial crisis of 2007. And our birth rate has just been on the steady decline ever since then, sort of wavering around the 1.6, 1.8 number. And so there's a couple of things here. The first is that we can't ignore the role of technology as it's impacted birth rates. Technology like birth control, technology like abortion, even technology like IVF has all had a massive impact on the decisions men and women are making about children, or when to get rid of their children or avoid children altogether. We've not recovered. We've never maintained a recovery of the post Roe v. Wade world. There was a slight increase during COVID, which was really interesting, but that number has, of course, continued to decline. I'm really curious if we're going to see a boost in births related to work from home policies. There's been a lot of interesting studies done that have found that particularly when women can work from home and have flexible jobs, that they tend to have more kids. And that doesn't mean that I think every job should then be a work from home flexible option. For some jobs that simply doesn't work. So I think it's very appropriate to frame that as a privilege when it makes sense. But women then maybe want to find those jobs and find careers and jobs that allow for that work from home flexibility, much like my situation now, because that does positively correlate with the sort of flexibility and attainability of children in ways that you just don't have if you're in the office and commuting 40 to 50 hours a week. So there's the role of technology in this that I think is really interesting. But it is a bigger question, I think, of then changing patterns around marriage and family. So you have no-fault divorce, which was kicked off in the 1970s with California and is now the law of the land when it comes to divorce in every state. Then in 2015, you had the Obergefell ruling, which gave a constitutional right for any two persons to get married or same-sex marriage. And that has, I think, only further played into this discussion because, as you said, no matter how hard two men try, they will never conceive a baby between the two of them. And so there's been a push, especially in the United States, and Canada's probably no better, where 5 states have now redefined infertility to include 2 men or a single person, saying that their relationship status makes them infertile. Like, I mean,
I don't know what else to do but laugh, Emma. I mean, we've reached peak insanity, and every time every time I say that, we find a new way to outdo it. I just wanted to pull up this. This is Canada. Sorry for it resembles the United States, but this is for people watching. This is Canada's stats on fertility. This is right off government website, right? And so if I zoom in on this, okay, you can see where Emma was talking about 1960. Well, 1960, it's at a high of almost 4 kids per family. Okay. In 1960, they authorized to sell the contraceptive pill and regulate the hormonal cycle. It starts to begin to decline like a rock. And in 1969, the decriminalization of contraception and abortion. And you can see then it just continues to decline. I'll just zoom out. Like, that's where we're at. My question is, I think I know the answer, but Emma, you keep doing this for an extended period at a time. What happens?
Well, if you're like Japan or South Korea or China, who is quite literally living this scenario right now, you push yourself to the brink of extinction. So in South Korea, their birth rate is only 0.07 births, or sorry, 0.7 births. Sorry, 0.07 would be insane. They're only 0.7 births, which is well below that 1 and well below that 2.1 replacement rate. And so what that means, very practically speaking, is that for every 100 grandparents or men and women of grandparent age in South Korea, there's only 7 grandchildren born. So 100 grandparents age, only 7 grandkids. That is a very lonely, very small, rapidly shrinking society, to say the least. And so you have reports, this was in, I believe, the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, that was even talking about how once you hit a certain point where your birth rate is so low and not rebounding, you actually hit what demographers call the point of no return, which is that it's incredibly unlikely or would be incredibly difficult for you as a nation to actually be able to reverse course and regain the sort of national stability necessary. So none of those countries are at that point yet where they are for sure on the downward decline. But this is why you see China, Japan, South Korea frantically using any mechanism within their power to try to encourage people to have kids. And unfortunately, their citizens simply aren't interested and they're not responding to incentives. So you have things like China's one-child policy, which was in place through 2016, which said you can only have one child. And if you conceive more, you're putting them up for adoption, you're aborting them, the horrific situations there. And it turns out that policy was really, really effective. So effective, in fact, that now no one is having kids. And even if they want to have kids, they have far too many men and not enough women who are interested in having kids. And so the math is not mathing yet again. And so you have China doing everything from sending out these cards to all the single women, promising them benefits and fortune and all the support they can imagine if they'll just get pregnant. And you have women saying, well, you spent decades telling me not to have kids and that I have to have a forced abortion or put in an IUD or put my kids up for adoption. And now you want me to have babies to save you. And it's basically like a friendly FU. That's not going to happen. You have cases in South Korea where they even have paid procreation days, where you literally get a paid day off from work if you'll just go and try to procreate with your spouse or some stable partner. And people still aren't taking them up on it. And so in a very real sense, these countries are actually pushing themselves to the brink of extinction, where to continue on as a viable country, they're either going to have to rely on massively high levels of immigration, which will necessarily change the makeup and structure and nature of the country itself, or I don't know what, but it's not looking good. The United States and Canada aren't quite there. But it's not looking good the closer and closer we get to this.
Well, both the United States and Canada have had mass immigration.
That too, yeah.
Right? Our population is growing right now, but it isn't because we're all having children, as the stats show. It's because of people coming from abroad and having it roughly an open border policy where you can just come on in. And you can, Canadians can see it. I assume Americans can see it when they're, you're like, man, this is a bit strange, right? But then you look at the numbers and you go, well, when we do the simple math, it just makes sense of what we're seeing now.
Yeah. And what's so interesting, though, is that even with immigrants coming to the US, by the second or third generation, their birth rate starts to match or assimilate with the broader culture, which means their second or third generation kids aren't having nearly as many kids as the first generation immigrants who come over. So there's this ongoing compounded problem where then to maintain your birth rate, you not only are relying on immigration, but you have to rely on ongoing rounds of immigration every generation to maintain those numbers.
Okay, so you've stared at this problem for a while. How do you change something that is, as basic as it gets, but like the math for affordability doesn't really math as much as I want to just be like, you got to figure it out. Like we can all see the affordability crisis going on, and everything happening now with Iran and everything else ain't exactly helping that out anymore. And you go, okay, so how are you going to convince the youth that this is this is the way that, you're not saving a country, but like it's not that like that's a lot to put on anyone. It's like, actually, you want meaning in life, this is the best way.
Yeah, this is 100% correct. This is why the sort of national calls, do your part, save the nation, please, I think largely fall on deaf ears. I would not have found it very compelling if I was continuing to wrestle with this. And that's a lot of where Lead Like Jael, the book that actually came out today. So I guess
Did it come out today?
coming out today. So last week.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But today, which has been a very fun day, but Lead Like Jael literally starts in the preface with me talking about being in college, meeting my now husband. We fall madly in love. We start dating. And as we start talking about marriage very seriously, the C word comes up for children. And I had this incredibly strong, fearful reaction against the idea that surprised even me, to be honest. Raised in a conservative Christian household, oldest of multiple siblings. And yet even I just had this very fearful response at the idea of having children. And it was a mix of feeling like it would be a letdown after working so many years to achieve success in academia, getting prepared to graduate, to go into work, and wanting to, experience the real world and live in a city and have those memories. And that was, for me at least, that was actually one of the biggest barriers that I was facing, which was just the question of how do I have this sort of sense of self that I really prioritized at the time, a misplaced sense of self. How do I pursue a career that I had in mind and also have kids and make it all work? It just seemed like it would be this endless state of impossible tensions and trade-offs. And I was so concerned and terrified that I ended up breaking up with my now husband. He was just my boyfriend at the time. And basically just saying, like, I just need time. I've got to figure this out. And what I realized very quickly is that all of the luster and appeal of jobs, of career, of doing something in the world really paled in comparison to the potential joy of building a life with someone that you really loved, and building a rich and meaningful life with that relationship with the children that come. And it was certainly a long journey where I was just diving deep into practically what does the Bible actually say about marriage, motherhood, work, and how we think about all of these things piecing together. That's the basis of Lead Like Jael, because I think it's something that so many women, especially in my generation, are wrestling with. I hear from young women where they say, yes, I too feel torn between girl boss feminism on the one hand, which says, put your career first, make the most of your youth, delay marriage and children for when you're older, 30s or 40s, what have you. And the sort of idealism of the trad wife movement. And I think the trad wife movement has many positive benefits and is a very positive signal on a number of levels. But it's still only one particular description of what it means or what it could mean to be a woman, right? I'm not homesteading. I don't necessarily want to homestead.
What is a trad wife?
Yes. Okay. So a traditional wife, which really, so it's like a traditional wife, trad wife. The term really refers to the online phenomenon of these women who, in some cases, like to role play in a previous era. So you have like the 1950s aesthetic, you have Victorian England aesthetic, you have homesteader on the prairie aesthetic. They sort of dress accordingly, model their lives around it. It can also tend to fall along these very simplistic lines of like, here are 7 ways to be a trad wife. Here are 8 ways to submit to your husband. Here are 6 things trad wives never do. It's a listicle. It's meant to be easy to digest, very, very online. And so again, I think it's a positive signal and actually in many ways an indictment of the 2010 girl boss feminism that said career comes first. And yet, trad wife movement online phenomenon is not actually the answer itself, right? It's providing you an image of what life can look like, but it's not actually giving you the tools you need to figure out how to apply that in your own life today, especially if you don't want to be a homesteader. And so when I'm thinking about how men and women are wrestling with this issue today, the thing that always comes to mind is that generally speaking, happy and hopeful people tend to have kids. And if you have a growing population of men and especially women who are terrified of or disinterested in having children, what does that ultimately say about the spiritual state of a nation that they don't want to have kids? At that point, you're saying that there is not a future that I want to invest in. There's not a sacrifice I want to suffer for. That, more than any of the other concerns that we've talked about on this podcast, strikes me as the most concerning factor related to declining birth rates, of what's going on in the hearts and souls of women in the United States, that this very natural good blessing is something that is now filling them with fear, dread, or disinterest.
Well, and I think it's interesting because, if you're a woman listening to this, what Emma said was at the start, she was conflicted about having kids. And I know I won't get too personal in my life, but I remember Mel and I, she was concerned about having kids. And that was like a full stop. What? No, this is what, no, we're having kids. But I remember that being like a big discussion back then. And so you go, that's interesting because it's seeping into society then. That's what you're pointing out, right? You come from, you listen to your background of where you come from and your upbringing, and yet you even questioned it. So you can imagine if you don't have that upbringing, you've been in the public school system, you've been around, I don't know, all these different types of people who are, career first, that type of thing. And you could be very conflicted, maybe beyond that, to how you even get back to it. I have a good friend on the podcast, and he was late, I want to say late 30s when he had his first kid, and he didn't get it. And then he had his first kid, and he's like, I get it. And he called me, and I was like, yeah, man, what are you talking about? But it's funny how it seems like such a foreign idea until you just do it.
Oh, this is such a big point and such a good point. And I talk about this a little bit in my book, that the perception that women who don't have children have about what it means to have kids is so wildly different than what you see from women who actually have children. So who are the women in the United States who report the highest levels of happiness and a sense of purpose in their life? It's married moms with children. And there's this very real idea that to not have kids, there's a sense that to understand it, you have to experience it. So there's the viral video that went around recently of this young woman in her, we'll say mid to late 20s, who was holding a baby for the first time, which is already insane in and of itself that she's holding a baby for the first time. But she had previously said, I never want to have kids. Her friend gives her this baby. She starts sobbing and is like, this is the greatest thing ever. Of course I want to have kids. They're amazing. But it brings up this incredible point, which is that with declining birth rates, and if you live in an urban area, if your family doesn't have a lot of kids, if you're not exposed to kids, then you won't know what you're missing out on. You'll only see the online caricatures where the cut says, I regret having my kids. And it's women who were struggling with genuine mental illnesses saying why kids ruin their life, which is not exactly the sort of stable or normal depiction of what it means to have kids that you actually want to be encouraging women toward. And yet that's what so much of our modern culture holds up as to be a mom. Or to be a mom means that you lose your brain and you're scattered all the time and disheveled. And it's somehow, like, I don't know, you think of all the dramatic depictions that you see there. And so there's this very real sense that, like, just to give a woman a baby, to invite her in, to let her see what it looks like. And we've done this a lot with our friends, especially because we were some of the first in our friend group to get married and have kids. And so many of our friends were really introduced to what it looks like to have kids in your 20s through our family. And so I had this one instance where a friend was helping me run some errands. And so I just handed her the baby and was like, can you buckle her in? I'm going to get this thing. And I come back and she's just like standing there holding my daughter. And she was like, how do you buckle a baby in the car? And I was like, yes, these are important lessons. And so at the time I just hadn't thought about, like, you just buckle the baby in, but she had no idea. But imagine how overwhelming motherhood feels if you can't even imagine what it looks like because you haven't seen it or gotten to experience it. And imagine how far more attainable it is if you actually get to join people in that, see the goodness of it. It's not as challenging in certain ways. And the challenging parts you just get through. That strikes me as a cultural solution, but a very powerful cultural solution when it comes to sort of re engaging people in the goodness of children.
Yeah, and to anyone listening that's sitting there like doubting themselves, uh, just as in a podcast, in my opinion, there's no dumb question. When it comes to buckling a child in a car seat, the first time that I had a newborn son, I stared at that thing and I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And the nurses chuckled and they said it's easy. And then they showed you, and after you don't even think about it after your first, I don't know, what is it, week, or maybe less, because you've done it so many times. But the first time is intimidating. We were watching The Office the other night, and Pam, and I'm spacing on his name,
Jim.
Jim. Thank you. I don't know why I was spacing on that. They're in the hospital and Jim doesn't know what to do. He's like, oh yeah, I gotta buckle that in, right? And I'm like, I remember that feeling. It's like, please don't let me leave here. I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna break this thing, and like, just let me stay here. You guys seem to know what you're doing. And I think any young person listening that is fearful of that is like, listen, we all go through it. And the thing about children now having almost a 10-year-old, Emma, is like every year I go, oh my God, how do I even get here? And then like, how do you deal with the new things? Because they're into like it's ever changing, and all three children are all completely different. It's not like they just come and they're like a little robot and they just do the same thing and you can just like plan, okay, that's going to be the marker by age each year. No. And so like for anyone listening that's even remotely fearful of it, it's like we all have the same fears. Don't kid yourself. It doesn't matter how much you're around a kid growing up. I mean, it does, but like overall, it's not like all of a sudden you're around kids all the time and all of a sudden you're just ready for it. It's like, no, because once it's you, it's a whole different feeling. Now, Lead Like Jael. I've been meaning to get to this. How do people find this? Your first book, correct?
Yes.
So congratulations. 2, where can people find it if they want to go pick up a copy?
Yes. So Lead Like Jael is on sale anywhere books are sold. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all of the other online websites you may shop on. So that's where I'm really encouraging people to order from.
Now, Jael, why did you pick her?
Yes. Okay. So Jael is such a fun and non-traditional example of biblical womanhood, if you will. So Jael's story is found in the Old Testament in the Bible in Judges chapter 4 and 5. And so you have Israel, God's people, at war with the Canaanites, their ongoing enemy throughout the Old Testament yet again. The general of the Canaanites comes stumbling out of the battle and to the tent of Jael. And so what's really interesting is in the story is that before he even gets to her tent, the text says that Jael looks out and sees him coming from afar, and she beckons him in, which means that right off the bat, it tells us she's politically engaged in what's happening around her. She knows who the general of the enemy army is, and she's able to engage with him. She invites him in, and he initially says, could I please just have some water and a place to rest? He's famished, he's exhausted, malnourished, it's been days in battle. And she says, yes, here's a warm glass of milk, here's a soft place to rest. Take your time. So he drinks the milk, he lays down and falls asleep. And then right as he falls asleep, she takes a wooden tent peg and mallet and drives it through his skull, thus soundly defeating Israel's enemy with one fell swoop. So not only is it a pretty cool example of feminine strength, because let's be honest, I don't think I could drive a wooden tent peg through a man's skull if my life depended on it, and her life literally depended on it. And yet she was able to do it. So how was she able to do it? It's because in her time, setting up and taking down tents was a feminine domestic duty. So she would have used those very tools to set up and take down her tent, her home, hundreds, if not thousands of times over the course of her life. And so the lesson that I thought was so profound that I wanted to put her on the cover as compared to Deborah or Esther or some of these better known heroines in the Bible is that her story tells us very clearly that because she was faithful to her daily ordinary duties and responsibilities as a wife, as a homemaker, as a mother, that was the way that God equipped her to crush the head of the enemy when he came knocking at her door. So her ordinary faithfulness to the task of maintaining and running a home is what equipped her for this extraordinary act of faithfulness. And so you see, she's politically engaged. She's not just saying, oh, well, the battle's happening out there, the culture war is happening out there. My husband, someone else will deal with it. She knew what was going on. She knew how to discern good from evil. She knew how to fight, but she didn't fight like a man. So it doesn't say that Jael picked up a sword and ran into battle. And in fact, no woman in the canonical Bible ever picks up a sword to fight. And yet there are countless stories of women like Jael who deliver the decisive blow in a given battle or fight. And it's because they're fighting through distinctly feminine means and ways that tend to flow from the home. So women don't have to leave the home to go out there to set aside marriage and family to do great things, but it's actually through those very callings, those very primary callings in a woman's life, that God uses her for all of these great things. And so you see Jael in this long line of female head crushers, whether it's the woman of Thebes a few chapters later, who takes a millstone, which would have been used to grind bread by women, and she drops it on this evil king's head, thus killing him and defeating the enemy. You have Mary, who bears Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, through her body and blood, one of the greatest feminine acts of strength of childbirth. And it's that son, her son, who ends up defeating death and Satan and evil once for all. And there's these countless stories that Jael just really embodies in a way that I thought was really fun, because when you talk about biblical femininity, sometimes you think like they're flowery, they're cute, they like the color pink. They talk about these sort of feminine, domestic, passive seeming expressions of what it means to be a woman. And Jael is just a really fun, unexpected story that actually very much makes all of those same points about the goodness of the home, but it shows you that the goodness of the home doesn't have to be dry, stuffy, and boring, but is actually the very place that God is at work in your life.
I'm curious. I should never ask a woman her age, but how old are you?
I'm 28.
Okay. I have read several different reports. Curious your thoughts. One is that the younger generation is becoming more and more conservative. Now, I assume in the United States I'd be more and more Republican, but forgive me if I'm a little off there. But in Canada, more and more conservative. And the other one is that the people who are going back to church more and more is the younger generation. Now, you are a little over a decade younger than me. I turned 40 here in May. And I am curious, is that what you, like when I sit and listen, I'm like, man, this is fascinating. Are your age group and younger interested in what you just said, or do they turn you off?
Our age group, and even younger than us, like 13 to 28, are far more religious than previous generations. Now, what makes this interesting is that the revival around faith, so returning to church, and the revival around family, which is prioritizing marriage and children, is being led by young men in our society. So young men in that category of 13 to 24 especially are far more likely to attend church, to pray, to read their Bible, and to be religiously affiliated more than even the young women in their category, actually a lot more than the young women in their category. And with this return to faith, we've seen a return to more conservative values and a growing desire to prioritize marriage and children. And what's interesting is that studies have pretty clearly pointed to it starts with a return to faith, and then you see the political change and the family change take place. So it's not you become more conservative and then you become religious, but it's actually this genuine religious experience that then reshapes your orders and your priorities and your loves in such a way that you then tend to be more conservative and want a family. So there was a poll done by the NBC, it's like the NBC desk poll this last year, that looked at men and women who voted for Kamala Harris and men and women who voted for Donald Trump in 2024. And what this study found is that for women who voted for Kamala Harris, career was their number one priority when it came to what a successful life or what they wanted out of life, a successful career. Marriage and children was almost at the bottom. For men who voted for Kamala Harris, it was similar. For women who voted for Donald Trump, career still ranked much higher than marriage and children. Marriage and children sat in about the middle zone where career was number one for them. But it was only men that voted for Trump in 2024 who had having children as their top priority of what it looks like to succeed and live a meaningful life. And then marriage and career sort of fell right under that. So it's interesting because it's not even marriage is the top priority. It's having kids is the top priority of what a good, successful life looks like. And so I was really plagued by this question as I was writing Lead Like Jael, which is that we are certainly seeing a revival of faith and family when it comes to the young men in the United States. But it was unclear to me if we were seeing the same revival take place among young women. So is there an audience for my book, or am I just writing to this hopeful audience? And what's been so interesting is in the last couple of months alone, we've started to see a slight uptick in Gen Z women who are prioritizing marriage and children greater than millennial generations before them, and saying that, no, this is the thing that will actually equate to a successful life. Not only getting married and having kids, but certainly that being part of the foundational vision of what it looks like to succeed. And so my hope is that we're at the beginning of a revival that was sort of started by young men returning to the church, that will then be followed by young women who were increasingly hungry for a more dynamic life script of what it means to be a woman in the world today, and allows her to live as a woman fully, embracing the unique gifts and distinctions of what it means to be a woman, to have children, to embrace marriage, to build a home that's meaningful, not at the exclusion of anything else. If you want to pursue other things, that's great. And one of the things I really talk about in the book is the beauty of a seasonal approach to life, which is invest in first things first, and then trust the Lord to bring in those second or third or fourth things, whether that's a job that you like or career passions or other work outside the home. Begin with a strong foundation and build the rest of your life after that, not making career the center and trying to build marriage and kids around that, which is what you often see in girl boss feminism.
And, that's one way to end this, that was fantastic, because I think right there, what you're saying is there's a lot of hope in the future, right? With men and women just turning from the ways of a whole bunch of what the world has offered us for so long, and continues to try and ram down our throat. I appreciate you hopping on and doing this, Emma. Been very nice to have a conversation with you. And once again, if you wouldn't mind, where can people buy your book? And congrats on, writing your first book.
Thank you. So Lead Like Jael is available today on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or anywhere that you purchase books. And if you want to follow my work more closely, I'm on X at EML Waters, and I'm on Instagram at EML Waters _.
Awesome.